Snow sifted down from a sky the color of pewter, each flake tumbling in silence, as though the world itself wished not to disturb her hiding. Gina Harrow pressed her body deeper into the hollow of the fallen log, her breath shuddering in little bursts that fogged before her lips. Bark scraped her cheek. The damp interior reeked of rot and earth, but it was safer than the open, safer than her father's hand dragging her back, safer than Orson Pike's breath thick with whiskey. She curled tighter, arms wrapped across her chest, whispering words that tasted like surrender. "Just kill me before they arrive." The wind swallowed the plea, carrying it across a snow-laden clearing. Somewhere beyond the drifted trees, the hoofbeats of her father's mule might already be sounding, though in truth Gina could not tell if it was her imagination or the echo of memory. All she knew was the weight of betrayal, that a father could measure her worth in coins and trade her life to a man who stank of drink and violence. The thought alone made her stomach seize, and tears froze before they could fall. Her hands ached with cold. She pressed them against her skirts, stiff calico stiffened further by ice. Hunger gnawed faintly, but fear kept it from becoming real. She dared not move, dared not make a sound. The forest seemed to crouch with her, holding its breath. Then came the crunch. Not of mule hooves, not of her father's angry steps, but of something heavier, measured, deliberate. Snow compressing under weight. She went rigid, her back straining against the curved wood of the log. Through a narrow crack in the bark she glimpsed movement, a figure cutting through the storm. He emerged like some myth from the blizzard. Tall, bare to the waist though the air stung sharp as knives, skin bronzed even beneath the pallor of winter. Scars slashed across his chest, each a story she dared not imagine. Black hair hung loose about his shoulders, whipping in the wind. In one hand he carried a spear tipped with obsidian, in the other nothing but the calm of a man who had long stopped fearing death. Gina's heart kicked against her ribs. She bit her lips so hard the copper taste of blood joined the bitter air. The stories rushed back, settlers whispering of raids, of Apache warriors moving like shadows, of girls taken and never seen again. Better to be killed quickly, she thought, than dragged into some fate she could not name. Her lips moved again, trembling against the bark. "Just kill me, before they arrive." The man paused before the log. Snow clung to the cords of muscle across his shoulders, melting as fast as it touched his skin. His dark eyes scanned the hollow, and though Gina tried to make herself small, his gaze found her. For a moment, nothing moved but the storm. Then, instead of dragging her out or striking with his weapon, he bent slowly and laid something against the entrance of the log. A fur cloak, heavy and thick, its smell of smoke and pine drifting inward. He did not speak. He did not reach. He only straightened again, looking down at her with a stillness that unnerved and steadied all at once. Then he turned, footsteps crunching as he walked a few paces away and set himself upon a stone, his spear upright, his gaze turned outward to the storm. He sat like a sentinel, not a captor. Gina could scarcely breathe. The warmth of the fur seeped toward her trembling hands, an invitation. She did not trust it, yet her body ached too much to resist. Slowly, she pulled it closer. The cloak wrapped her shoulders, heat blooming where none had been. She closed her eyes, shamed by her own relief. Time stretched. The storm thickened, blanketing the forest in white silence. Gina dozed and woke in fits, always startled to see him still there, unmoving except to add wood to a fire he built a few feet from the log. Sparks flew upward, scattering against the night. His profile, lit by flame, revealed neither malice nor pity, only a gravity she could not understand. At dawn, hunger drove her from hiding. She crawled from the log, clutching the fur around her, eyes wary as a deer at water. He watched but did not rise. Before her on the snow lay strips of dried meat, placed neatly on a slab of bark. Her stomach twisted with longing. She knelt, took a piece with trembling fingers and chewed slowly, the taste of smoke and salt filling her mouth. Tears stung unexpectedly. Tears not only of hunger but of the strange mercy in being allowed to eat without demand. She raised her eyes to him. He gave no nod, no sign of approval, only looked away toward the trees as if her dignity must remain intact. All day they lingered in silence. She learned to move within the edges of his stillness, fetching snow to melt in the pot, arranging the fur closer to the fire, stitching the torn hem of her skirt with thread she carried in her pocket. He said nothing, yet she felt watched over, as though her father's hand could no longer reach. Night fell again, cruel and long. When shadows deepened, she startled at each groan of wind. Her dreams turned again to Orson Pike's sneer, her father's bargaining eyes, the townsfolk who whispered that a woman was worth only what she could bring in dowry. She woke with a cry, breath ragged. The fire burned low. And there he was, standing at the doorway of the lodge he had led her to, a shelter carved from logs, smoke trailing from the roof hole, snow piled against the sides. He did not move toward her, only stood with spear in hand, gaze fixed outward. Protecting. She pressed her hands to her chest, the fur cloak gathered tight. Something shifted inside her. Still fear, yes, but threaded now with a fragile thread of trust, like the first green shoot beneath melting ice. Her voice cracked when she spoke, barely above a whisper, but this time not meant for death. Why help me? The wind swallowed her words. He did not answer. Perhaps he could not. Perhaps the answer lay not in speech, but in the way he remained between her and the dark. Snow hissed against the fire, and in that sound Gina felt a truth, that her life had already changed, though she could not yet say how. She looked at him one last time before lying down again, her fear tempered by the steady rhythm of his presence. Beyond the log walls, the storm gathered strength, and somewhere in that storm men still sought her. But here, beside the quiet giant, she began to wonder if surrender might mean something other than death. The lodge smelled of smoke and pine sap, its walls breathing warmth into a night that should have killed her. Gina sat close to the fire, her skirts drying stiffly, steam lifting from the fabric like ghosts fleeing. The cloak he had given her was spread across her shoulders, weighty as if it carried a history of battles and winters endured. Her fingers trembled not from cold now, but from the strangeness of sitting in the home of a man she did not know, a man who had lifted her from death's threshold, without asking why she hid or who hunted her. He moved quietly within the space, his bare feet soundless on the earthen floor. He set a pot upon the stones and filled it with snow, waiting as it hissed and melted into water. The firelight glinted against the scars that crossed his chest, and Gina found her eyes wandering there before she caught herself and looked away, ashamed of the heat that touched her cheeks. He was broad, built like the trunks of the pines outside, and yet he carried himself with a restraint that unsettled her more than any violence could have. She clasped her hands tight, knuckles whitening. "Why me?" she whispered, not expecting him to answer. He gave none. His dark gaze lingered on the flames as though speech itself had been banished. She remembered the stories the settlers told. Savages who stole, who killed, who lived without God. And yet here he was, melting snow so she could drink, laying food within reach without demand. The silence between them thickened, not cruel but heavy, like snow pressing on roof beams. Gina felt it settle into her bones. She had spent her life beneath voices, her father's commands, Orson Pike's crude laughter, the gossip of women who measured her worth by the dowry she could not bring. Now she found herself in a silence that neither judged nor bargained. It unnerved her because it left her with herself. He pushed the pot toward her when the water warmed, motioning with his hand. She lifted it, sipping, the heat scalding her tongue yet softening the ache inside her chest. She looked at him over the rim, waiting for some claim to be laid, some order barked. None came. He only leaned back, eyes steady, as though her drinking were proof enough that she lived, and that was reason enough for his effort. Her voice cracked in the hush. "I cannot go back." She spoke to the fire more than to him. He would sell me. He would sell me like cattle. Her throat closed. Shame burned hotter than the flames. She dared not look at him, fearing he would see her as her father did, something to be traded, bartered, used. But still he offered no words, only stirred the coals with a stick, and in that gesture she felt no judgment, only endurance. The storm outside rattled against the logs, snow pelting in bursts that sounded like fists upon a door. Gina flinched each time, but he never did. He sat still, as though storms were companions, not enemies. When the wind whistled fiercest, he rose and laid another log upon the fire, the sparks rising to trace the lines of his jaw. His shadow loomed across the wall, tall and solemn, a figure both fearsome and steady. Her hunger returned in waves. He seemed to sense it, for he reached to a pouch by the wall and placed dried venison upon the ground between them. She hesitated, then took a piece, the fibers tough between her teeth. Each bite grounded her, reminding her body it had not been abandoned. Her eyes watered. She turned her face away, embarrassed that something as small as food could unravel her so completely. Hours passed like this, in silence woven with small mercies. She mended the torn hem of her dress with a scrap of thread from her pocket, her hand steadier when she noticed his gaze linger for a moment on the neatness of her stitches. He rose once to fasten a hide over a gap in the wall where the wind whistled, his movements efficient, practiced. When he returned to sit, the distance between them felt smaller, though they had not spoken a single word to bridge it. Night deepened. Gina lay upon a mat of furs, the cloak still around her. The fire snapped softly, painting the roof beams in shifting gold. She closed her eyes, but dreams came quickly and cruelly. She saw her father's face, red with anger and greed, heard his voice promising Orson Pike a daughter in exchange for whiskey and coin. She twisted in sleep, whispering no, no, until she woke with a cry that shivered in the air. He was there by the door, spear in hand. He did not turn toward her, but his presence filled the room like a wall. She pressed a hand to her racing heart, breathing hard, then softer as she realized he had stood there long before she woke, watching the night instead of her. Guarding. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was to be shielded without demand. Her eyes blurred again, but she forced the tears back, unwilling to be weak before him. She whispered into the half-dark, "Do you not sleep?" He did not answer, yet she thought she saw the faintest curve in his shoulders, as though he understood the question was not about sleep but about trust. She rolled onto her side, listening to the rhythm of the fire, her body loosening inch by inch, the terror of days giving way to exhaustion. The storm howled through the night, but inside the lodge the quiet thickened until it seemed to hold her like unseen arms. As she drifted toward sleep once more, her hand brushed against the fur cloak, and she realized she clutched it not out of fear now, but gratitude. When dawn's light crept through the smoke hole, pale and blue, Gina stirred to the sound of footsteps outside. She froze, blood rushing cold, for these were not the heavy measured steps of the man who had saved her. These were lighter, uncertain, more than one pair. Her pulse quickened. She turned her head toward the doorway. He was already standing there, rigid, spear lifted, every line of his frame sharpened, as though he had known this moment would come. Snow drifted in through the cracks around the door, and beyond it the murmur of voices carried on the wind. Men's voices. Gina's breath caught. Her father had found her. The storm had quieted, though its memory lingered in the drifts that banked against cabins and fences. The sky hung pale and brittle, the air sharp with a clarity that made every sound travel. Gina walked at Elias's side, her steps hesitant in the crusted snow, the fur cloak cinched close around her shoulders. The town lay ahead, wooden fronts stark against the whiteness, smoke lifting in thin streams from chimneys. Each building seemed to lean forward, waiting. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. She had not set foot here since her father's decree, since the night she fled. The thought of faces turning, mouths whispering, eyes fastening upon her with that cruel, knowing weight made her stomach clench. Yet Elias moved steadily, unhurried, his spear resting against his back, his silence a shield she clung to. The first heads turned before they reached the trading post. Martha Clary stood on her porch, shawl wrapped tight, her lips pursed to keep the cold from biting, though Gina knew that look, disdain disguised as piety. Martha's eyes widened when they fell on Gina walking beside the Apache, her hand clutching the cloak he had given. She whispered something to the neighbor woman, too loud to be anything but deliberate. The words cut across the street like thrown stones. Shamed herself, living with a savage. Heat burned Gina's face. Her steps faltered, but Elias did not slow. He walked as if the whispers were nothing but wind. Children clustered near a fence, peeking with wide eyes, then running when their mothers called them back, snatching them away as though danger might leap from his skin. At the well, Orson Pike leaned against the post, bottle half hidden beneath his coat. His grin was crooked, his eyes narrowed to slits against the snow glare. Thought you were lost, girl, he drawled, voice thick with drink. Didn't know you'd gone crawling into the arms of... He spat in the snow, letting the insult hang unfinished, heavier for what he withheld. His gaze flicked to Elias, testing, mocking. Gina's breath came fast. Shame swelled in her chest, louder than the cold. She could not bear the laughter building in Orson's throat, nor the weight of Martha's stare boring into her back. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the snow. Her knees trembled. Then, without thinking, she moved closer to Elias, her hand brushing against his arm. She did not grip it, only hovered there, as though begging the nearness to hold her upright. Elias turned his head slightly, his dark eyes catching hers. There was no command in them, no question. Only steadiness, like a mountain that did not move for storms. He shifted his stance subtly, placing his broad frame between her and the cluster of gawking faces. The gesture was wordless but profound, and for the first time that morning, Gina's lungs filled without shuddering. Inside the trading post, warmth pressed heavy. The air reeked of tobacco and leather. The clerk's smile faltered when Elias ducked through the doorway, his height filling the space. Coins clinked on the counter as Gina reached for supplies, a sack of flour, a bundle of thread, but her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped them. Then came the voice she feared most. Gina. Her father stood in the doorway, shoulders broad from years of farm work, his beard salted with gray. His eyes, however, had not aged. They burned with the same merciless fire she had known since girlhood. He stepped inside, his boots striking the boards with certainty. "You'll come with me," Caleb Harrow said, his voice cutting. "This ends now." The words froze her. She gripped the counter to stay upright. She saw Orson Pike's shadow lean in the doorframe behind her father, that grin returning, hunger thinly veiled. Her chest constricted until she thought she might faint. Elias moved, not quick, not loud, only stepped closer, his body a wall between Gina and the two men. His silence filled the room heavier than shouting could. Caleb's eyes narrowed, fury sparking at the defiance. "This is my daughter," Caleb spat, pointing a gnarled hand past Elias. "You've no right, none. She's mine to give, and I'll see her wed as I please." Gina's throat closed around a cry. She could not let the room believe she was an object to be owned. She reached, trembling, and laid her hand on Elias's arm fully this time, clinging to him with fingers that dug into his skin. Her voice shook, but the words tumbled out. "I will not go." Silence collapsed the room. The clerk froze mid-motion. Martha's shadow lingered at the window. Orson's grin faltered. Even Caleb, for a breath, seemed struck by the force of his daughter's trembling defiance. Her heart hammered so violently, she thought it might split her chest. Elias did not move, but his hand rose slowly, resting over hers where it clung to him. The weight of his palm was solid, anchoring. He said nothing. He did not need to. Caleb's jaw tightened. He turned with a curse, shoving past Orson, his boots striking hard on the porch as he stormed into the snow. Orson followed, muttering oaths, his swagger bruised. The crowd outside shifted like restless cattle, whispers rising louder now that the confrontation had spilled into the street. Gina stood trembling until her knees threatened to give way. Elias lowered his hand from hers but stayed near, his presence keeping her upright where her strength faltered. She drew a ragged breath, tasting iron at the back of her throat. When they stepped out into the glare of noon, the eyes of the town followed them. Gossip crackled like fire. Gina felt each whisper as if it scraped her skin raw. They said her name like it was already ruined. They said she had chosen shame. She bowed her head, cheeks burning, but Elias walked with the same even stride, as if their words weighed less than snowflakes. That night, back in the lodge, Gina sat near the fire with her face in her hands. Her shoulders quaked. The humiliation clung like a brand. "They will never let me forget," she whispered. "Never." Her voice broke. "I'm nothing now. To them, I'm..." Her words dissolved. She dared not finish. Elias added wood to the fire, his movements unhurried. He did not try to comfort her with lies, did not scold her tears. He only sat, the glow tracing the angles of his scarred chest, his gaze fixed upon the flames as though he too had been measured by others and found wanting. The silence stretched, deep and steady, until Gina felt her sobs soften. She raised her head, watching the firelight flicker across his face. His eyes reflected not pity, not judgment, but a kind of endurance that seemed older than the mountains. For the first time, she wondered what shame he carried, what rejection had forged that silence. The storm outside was quiet now, but her father's vow had been written in the frost of his breath. He would come again. Orson Pike's hunger had not lessened. And Gina knew, as she leaned unconsciously toward the fire's warmth and the man who guarded it, that her choice had already been made, though the cost of it would tear at her yet. Snow fell in fine silver threads, veiling the valley in silence. Gina stood outside the lodge, her breath curling in faint clouds, watching as Elias worked at the base of a pine tree. He knelt with a bone blade in his hand, chipping, shaping, smoothing. The steady scrape filled the air like a heartbeat. She did not know what he was making, only that his focus was absolute, each motion deliberate, as if the act itself carried more weight than words ever could. Days had passed since the confrontation in town, yet the sting of whispers still clung to her skin. Martha Clary's voice echoed in her memory, sharp as frost, branding her a woman ruined. Orson's grin haunted her like a bruise that would not fade. Even her father's fury, his claim upon her life, lingered in the marrow of her bones. But here in the clearing, where snow bent the branches low, there was no voice but the steady rhythm of Elias's hand against the bone. Gina wrapped the cloak tighter around her shoulders. She thought of how he had stood in that crowded post, silent yet unyielding, how his hand had pressed over hers when she had dared to defy her father. That gesture still burned on her skin. No man had ever given her dignity instead of demand. She did not know how to bear the weight of it. When he rose, the carving lay in his palm, pale against his dark hand. A ring, rough yet graceful, carved from elk bone. He stepped toward her, snow crunching beneath his bare feet, his chest broad and scarred as though winter itself had no claim upon him. Gina's breath hitched. He did not speak. He only opened his hand, offering. Her heart surged against her ribs. No words were needed. The meaning lived in his eyes, in the quiet that had grown between them like a fire tended in secret. He was not asking with the authority of her father, nor demanding as Orson would have. He was placing a choice in her hand, and the enormity of that gentleness stole the strength from her knees. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the ring. The bone was warm from his touch. For a moment, shame flooded her. The whispers of the town, the judgment that would brand her forever. But when she looked at him, standing silent and steady in the falling snow, something inside her broke open. She slid the ring onto her finger. The world seemed to pause. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, melted against her skin. Elias's gaze held hers, not soft, not fierce, but deep as if seeing her whole and unashamed. He gave no vow, no declaration. He only reached and, with care that startled her, brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. That single gesture felt louder than church bells. That night, the fire burned low inside the lodge. Gina lay on one mat, Elias on another a short distance away. Yet the space between them seemed fragile, too thin to contain what had shifted. She listened to the crackle of wood, the whisper of wind against the roof. For the first time, she was not afraid of the night. Her hand moved toward the bone ring, thumb stroking its surface. She felt the weight of it, not heavy but anchoring. Tears welled, though she did not weep. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the air rich with smoke and pine, and she thought, "I belong somewhere at last." In the days that followed, she learned the rhythm of his silence. He rose early, leaving meat near her place at the fire. She mended his torn garments with careful stitches, and though he did not thank her, she caught the flicker of his eyes lingering on her work. Their lives intertwined in gestures. A cup of water handed without request, a hide placed over her shoulders when wind rattled the lodge. Each act, quiet as falling snow, built something she could not yet name. But outside their refuge, the world's judgment sharpened. When Gina returned to the edge of town for supplies, heads turned, mouths tightened. Women drew their children closer, men muttered into their collars. She bore their stares with the ring hidden beneath her glove, its secret pressing warmth into her skin. She told herself it was enough to walk back into the trees where Elias waited, silent as always, yet steady. One evening, after they shared venison by the fire, Gina dared to speak. Her voice was raw and used. "They will never forgive me," she said, eyes fixed on the flames. "Never." Her hand brushed against the ring, a nervous confession. "And yet, I do not wish them to." Elias did not look at her. He tossed a log into the fire, sparks leaping like stars. His silence held an answer, acceptance without need for words. She leaned closer to the warmth, her body loosening, as though she had been holding her breath all her life until now. Later, when sleep pressed heavy, she lay down on the furs. The lodge glowed with the last embers, shadows stretching long. She listened for the sound of his breathing, steady and near, and found comfort in its rhythm. Slowly, she shifted until her mat brushed against his, the smallest connection. She waited, breath caught, expecting him to pull away. But he did not move, did not draw back. The quiet between them deepened, and she felt safe enough to close her eyes. Outside, the snow thickened again. Wolves howled in the distance, their voices rising in mournful chorus. Gina stirred, half dreaming, pressing her hand against the ring. In the echo of that sound, she realized she no longer heard herself as prey. She was no longer a daughter to be sold, no longer a woman marked by shame. She was someone chosen, and someone who had chosen in return. Yet as peace settled over her, a shadow lingered. In the crackle of the fire, she saw again her father's eyes, full of fury and possession. She knew men like Orson did not forget what they believed owed to them. The world beyond these walls would not accept her quiet marriage in the snow. Her fingers tightened around the ring until her hand ached. She turned her head toward Elias, sleeping with one arm folded beneath his head, scars glowing faintly in the firelight. For the first time, she let her gaze rest fully upon him, drinking in the breadth of his chest, the calm etched into his face. She thought of the storm he had withstood, the silence he carried like armor. She wondered if his strength could hold against the storm her father would surely bring. Her breath trembled as she lay back, listening to the wind batter the walls. She felt both shielded and exposed, safe in the moment but hunted by what waited beyond. She closed her eyes, whispering the words she had spoken once in despair, but now with another meaning altogether. "Just kill me before they arrive." But this time, she did not mean death. She meant the courage to stand, to be unbroken when the storm of judgment and betrayal returned. And as the night deepened, she sensed it would return sooner than she wished. The snowstorm came as if summoned by fury itself, wind tearing across the valley, flinging shards of ice against the lodge. The walls groaned under its assault, yet inside the fire held, low but steady, its light warming the shadows where Gina sat. She clutched the fur cloak around her shoulders, her hand resting on the bone ring Elias had given. The storm's voice seemed to whisper her father's, carrying the echo of ownership and threat. She knew, as sure as the storm raged, that he would not relent. When the pounding came at the door, it was not the storm alone. A fist struck wood, followed by the scrape of boots in the snow. Elias rose from where he crouched near the fire, spear in hand, his eyes narrowing. Gina's breath froze in her throat. She had prayed for time, for silence, but her father's rage was relentless. "Gina!" Caleb Harrow's voice split the night, ragged with drink and fury. "Come out! You shame me with this heathen filth. You'll come home, girl, or by God I'll drag you." Behind his shout came other voices. Orson Pike's slurred laugh, the mutter of two more men emboldened by cold anger and whiskey. The sound of weapons clinked faintly beneath their words. Gina pressed her back to the wall, her knees weak. Fear poured through her veins, but beneath it something new burned, a quiet thread of resolve. She touched the ring again, grounding herself in its weight. Elias pushed the door open and stepped into the storm. Snow lashed across his bare chest, scars catching the moonlight. He stood like a mountain carved from silence, the spear gleaming black in his hand. The wind whipped his hair loose, and the storm seemed to bow around him. Caleb stood a few paces off, snow crusting his beard, eyes burning in their hollows. Orson swayed beside him, a knife at his belt, grin broad and ugly. The other two men shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and fear of the figure before them. "You think she's yours?" Caleb roared over the wind. She's mine. Flesh of my flesh, and I'll trade her as I see fit. His voice cracked, fury and desperation mingling. Gina stepped into the doorway, the storm clawing at her skirts. Her teeth chattered, not from cold but from the weight of the moment. For weeks she had whispered for death rather than this. Now, she found her voice rising into the gale. I will not go with you. Her words cut sharper than the wind, startling even herself. I am no one's to sell. Not yours. Not his. Not anyone's. The men stilled, their eyes jerking to her. Caleb's face twisted, disbelief warring with rage. Orson barked a laugh, cruel and mocking. Listen to her, he sneered. Think she's found herself a husband in the snow. A savage don't make you a wife, girl. Makes you less than nothing. Elias did not move, but his silence thundered. He stepped forward, planting himself between Gina and their eyes, the storm swirling at his feet. His spear lowered, not in threat but in warning. Caleb snarled, drawing a pistol from beneath his coat. The gleam of metal caught the firelight spilling from the lodge. Gina's breath ripped from her throat. For a heartbeat the world slowed. The snow suspended, her father's hand shaking on the gun, Elias steady as stone. Then Orson lunged, blade flashing. Elias moved with a swiftness that startled. The spear shaft striking Orson across the chest, sending him sprawling into the snow. Orson gasped, wind knocked from him, his knife skittering into the drifts. The other men faltered, fear flickering in their eyes. Caleb raised the pistol, aiming past Elias at his daughter. I'll cure this shame myself. Gina's cry broke the night. Father, stop. Elias shifted, the spear but crashing against Caleb's wrist. The gun fired wild, the shot lost in the storm. The recoil sent Caleb stumbling, his fury crumbling into panic. He fell to his knees, clutching his wrist, the weapon buried in the snow. The storm wailed, drowning his curses. Gina stepped forward, the cloak whipping around her. Her voice rang clear, carried on the gale. I am not yours. Not to sell, not to trade, not to command. I am my own. She turned, her hand lifting to Elias's arm, resting there without fear. And I have chosen. The words seemed to hang in the frozen air. The men stared, their courage unraveling in the face of her defiance and Elias's immovable presence. Orson crawled to his feet, clutching his ribs, eyes darting with cowardice. The other two stepped back, shaking their heads. Caleb's curses faltered into silence, his authority crumbling like the snow beneath him. One by one, they turned and vanished into the blizzard, their shapes swallowed by white. Caleb lingered a moment longer, his eyes hollow, his voice low. You'll regret this, girl. Yet the words held no weight now. He staggered after the others, the storm erasing their tracks. Gina sagged against the doorframe, her chest heaving. The storm roared, but inside her a deeper quiet settled. She had spoken aloud what she had never dared, that she belonged to no man's will but her own. The shame that had shadowed her broke apart, scattered like snow on the wind. Elias stood beside her, snow glittering on his shoulders. He did not look at her, yet his presence spoke louder than vows. His silence was not emptiness but strength, a fortress that had held when all else crumbled. Gina turned to him, her voice soft, trembling but certain. I am not afraid anymore. The words left her lips like a prayer, one answered not by heaven, but by the steady hand he laid against her back. She leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his skin through the storm's bite, the solidness of a man who asked nothing but stood beside her all the same. Behind them, the fire still burned within the lodge, casting light into the night. The storm raged, but within that circle of warmth and silence, Gina felt the first taste of peace she had ever known. Perhaps love was not the thunder the town demanded, nor the vows shouted in churches. Perhaps it was this, the quiet fire that endured the storm, the dignity found when the world stripped everything else away. She lifted her face to the snow, eyes wet but unbroken. And in that moment, with Elias's hand steady against her, she knew the storm would pass, but what they had chosen in its heart would remain.